Greetings, friends. I wanted to discuss what makes a man a good leader. I haven't been around great leaders in my life, except recently in my life. I can speak to two examples of men who I think, no man is perfect, but certainly in one case, I've seen a good example of a leader in my life, and that is the priest, my spiritual father, at the church where I attend, the Russian Orthodox Church. The other example, it's kind of two examples, but it's a different category. It's the foreman. A foreman is kind of like a man who works in a factory or some sort of technical setting where he kind of works his way up from the bottom, but he has more experience and he has formal authority over the common workers because of his knowledge, and he directs affairs. And it's not exactly like being management, but you're kind of like a sergeant in the military. The sergeant would not be an officer either, or a non-commissioned officer who has the respect of the common men because he works his way up from the bottom. That's kind of like a foreman in the factory. Now, it's two different kinds of leadership that I'm commenting on here. Like what the priest does in his setting is different, and I might argue of a higher level. It's in some ways more important, but every world needs its foremen in factories too, keeping things running. But it's of a different nature, what the leadership that the priest exercises than what the foreman in the factory exercises. One of the obvious differences between the two leadership roles is that in the case of the factory, it's a good thing to be able to yell at someone, to be able to get angry at someone and make them understand that you are not happy with them and that you expect things to change now or else. And that is something that the foremen are capable of doing that not every man is. It requires a certain healthy level of testosterone. It can become a pathological trait. It's something that you have to keep a watch on. But it is a certain aggressive trait which has its proper use. And if you need to make sure that a lot of people are doing their job, that requires yelling at people sometimes and not being a pushover. But can you imagine if the priest was yelling at people? He's dealing in a completely different situation. In the one hand, in the factory, men are there who slave for money. In the other case, people come to a church and they even donate money to a church because the priest can't be yelling. And if he's yelling at people, that could come across as weakness. And for the priest to lose his cool in a public setting would be not optimal to his leadership qualities. But in the factory, it's a different thing. But there are some things that they share in common of the two different categories I was discussing here. Like you have to have a lot of energy, you have to have a lot of stamina, and a lot of endurance to run daily affairs. In this case, a meatpacking factory. And the reason I mentioned two foremen is because there's one foreman who's basically in charge of all the butchery going down on the deboning section. And then the other foreman is in charge of all the packaging and boxing and quality control and sending things off. And he might even be technically of a higher status. But they both wear blue helmets, so they're distinguished from all the common people who, laborers like myself, we all wear white helmets. A man exercising good qualities as a leader would be in a formal setting. That's not always how you're going to find them in life, but they excel well when there's a formal setting that they're operating in, whether it's a church, which is not just any church, but a church in communion around the world with hundreds or thousands of other congregations operating in that formal structure with a long history and tradition, or in the fact of a factory, which is smaller but still operating in a given field, in a given industry with many years preceding it, if not even a timeless industry. Like there haven't always been industrial factories, but there's always been butchery since practically the beginning of time. So the man exercises his leadership by demonstrating superb energy and stamina and endurance, standing around. I mean, the priest at my church, I mean, there's several priests, but he's the archpriest. He's also in his 70s. The foremen are older than the normal men, but they've put in many years. And in many cases, you work your way up from the bottom. If you're a priest, maybe you're not necessarily, you may or may not come from a lower social status, I don't know. But at some point you go to seminary, which takes money and takes years of commitment. And not everyone who goes to seminary may end up becoming a practicing priest. In the case of working in the factory, they could be called upon at any time to be doing a common labor job if there's not anyone there to do it, which there often is a lack because someone might not show up or they have to replace someone. So they have to be capable of doing anything in the production process, from cutting meat to packaging it or dealing with various problems with the conveyor belts or maybe a problem with the computer. Being a leader is a bit different in terms of the priest because he's in a more formal structure. His main duty is to lead liturgy, lead the ceremony multiple times a week. But he'll also do many other things in the community. The priest will visit with members of his congregation. He'll do various services for them. He'll be meeting with people. He'll be involved with different groups. But he's really there on the level of the common person who are involved in his parish, or who attend church, who know him. He's involved in so many people's lives. He's doing so many things. He probably does not sleep for more than 5 hours a night, and it may be much less than that. And somehow he's able to do it. He has to drive to the church from where he lives. He has to pick people up. When Pascha comes, which goes on for weeks, these men in the clergy are probably not getting a lot of sleep, but they love what they're doing, and they've given their whole lives over to God. You got to be all in. You can't be doing something that you don't like doing. Although with a foreman, I mean, maybe they want to retire and they're looking forward to that. But even with a foreman in the factory, it's like you give yourself over to that career, to the company. I mean, you got to get there obviously earlier than the common people, and you'll be one of the last to leave. So, like, how much sleep is the foreman getting? Like, he's probably not getting more than 6 or 7 hours of sleep either. I mean, what kind of life do you have? You got to come back. Hopefully, maybe they have a wife to make them dinner and stuff. With me, who I'm working there, just a common laborer. Like, I most of my time is occupied. I come home, I eat dinner. And I cook food for the next morning and the next lunchtime. But if you're one of these other guys, you have more responsibilities. So I sure as well hope that they have some wife to make them dinner and make them food for the next day. Because otherwise they got to do that themselves. And you don't have a lot of time. Like literally you got to be in bed by 10 p.m. If you want at least to be in bed for 7 hours, because you got to get up around 5 in the morning probably. You're giving yourself your life over to this task, and that can be a good thing if you get it right. In the case of my spiritual father, there's additional leadership qualities he has which are very effective. He's well respected. He's very humble. That means that anyone can approach him and he's not going to be put off by talking to a crazy person, because sometimes crazy people might come into the church. They're drawn to the church sometimes, and a crazy person might come in there. But he doesn't let any random person throw him off. And he can be gracious with people when they're asking for him to sign letters for them, even though he doesn't know people are coming. He might be thrown off by people asking many requests of him, but he's being gracious in the presence of others. So he sets a good example. I mean, I've seen him go through the liturgy and do all these things. He's in his 70s. I mean, he may have to retire soon, but like I see that it takes a toll physically. Like you're leading the liturgy for over 2 hours standing, concluding with a very powerful sermon that he delivers, and they translate it into English. They have a translator there, so I know. And his sermons are very powerful. For example, he was talking recently about how after the resurrection of Christ, or our celebration of it, like how the myrrh bearing women who brought myrrh to the tomb of Christ, they symbolized, or they correspond with the women during the Soviet period in Russia, who kept, or in other Orthodox countries under the Soviet domination, who these women, often grandmothers, kept the faith alive when the faith was officially, I believe the word is proscribed, like you weren't really supposed to be seen in church, or that would affect your career prospects negatively. You might not be able to study in the university. You'd have people reporting on you. They didn't like religion. They tried to really suppress it, and it was often the grandmothers who baptized their children and kept the faith alive for them. But that, I don't mean to get distracted by that, but that would just be an example of our spiritual father's sermon delivered in a powerful and very blunt fashion. Like, he's not trying to mince words. He's not trying to sugarcoat anything. It's a very stark feeling. And I know that he's the glue holding the old ways, which is one of the reasons I joined the Russian Orthodox Church, because they're so traditional that they don't bend to the winds of the time in the world and liberalism. He's one of the main anchors in that church. I pray that the church will stand firm against the tides of the world and not submit to liberalism once our spiritual father retires. I mean, I know Orthodoxy is the best way you can go, but Orthodox churches also fall. Individually, they fall to the winds of the world. And this man is keeping that strong old ways of the tradition alive in our church. And we're very blessed to have this man. Like, it's incredible leadership, like the humility, the sheer energy, the diplomacy dealing with the pandemic times when they were trying to shut down the church. I'll give the Protestants some credit because they went all out and resisted, but then they get shut down. You know, you see some of these churches out west. The Orthodox are more like, want to work a little bit diplomatically, but unlike other Orthodox churches, like some Ukrainian Orthodox church I call that was shut down because they were shut down. Oh, you got to shut down. Or some Serbian Orthodox church I didn't hear back from them. But this church was open during the pandemic. Now, they were restricted in numbers, but they tried to get around it diplomatically. So you also have to know how to be diplomatic, how to handle, like, when the police come to visit, the police outside the church watching people coming in and out. Are they wearing masks? You know, they want to close us down. You have to deal with them in the right way, say the right thing. So it requires more than just a zealous heart to be a good leader. You need to be tactful and observant of the situation. Also, our spiritual father, he's not so rigid to the rules. Like, I mean, I know you might think Orthodox are all about rules, and they have all their rules, but he knows that wisdom is not applying a code to every situation. Wisdom is adapting in certain situations. You do adapt. You do find what they might call economia. If there's no perfect option in the world, there are better ways of doing things in certain situations. There are times when you can kind of bend the rules, and it takes a wise man and an experienced leader to know when is the time that you can bend the rules and when is the time you can't. For example, if you're eating with other people who may not be on the same spiritual level as you are you going to insist on them fulfilling every fast requirement? Would you frown at them if they were eating meat and they're not supposed to be eating meat in your presence, or none of you are supposed to be eating meat? Would you make a big fuss about that? Some Orthodox would. I think in the case of our spiritual father, he probably, I don't know, I don't want to speak for him, but I'm just trying to say that he would find the wisest thing to do in the situation. You have to be able to kind of think on your feet and adapt. That's kind of what wisdom is, as I understand. You know. Another important thing about a man being an effective leader is that you ultimately want to have the respect of the people underneath you. That's important. You want to show that you're amongst them. You're in a sense one of them, but you're not you're a buddy. You're not necessarily a friend. I mean, it depends on how you use the word friend, but you're not the buddy of your priest or your boss at work. I mean, that should be obvious, I think, but it needs to be said. It needs to be said. I mean, just the sense that people of different formal status in an organization, or even outside an organization, there needs to be a distance between them. So a good leader knows how to not be too aloof, but not be too chummy, buddy buddy, because if you start to be too close to people, then they start to see you as one of them, and then they may not. They may either neglect their duties towards you or towards their job, or they may take advantage of you. Things might start to move in a bad direction in any number of ways. So it's best to always maintain a certain level of distance from the people underneath you, and with respect and with harmony, you maintain goodwill amongst all men in your company, despite the fact that some are lower and some are higher. And a good leader knows how to bring out the best in people and let them do their job, which benefits everyone in the group to an optimum level. A good leader is there to steer the ship, just like the foreman in the factory is steering the production process. The priest is steering the liturgy and directing the congregation. He's the one preparing the sacrifice and administering communion to the congregation. He's the one that people really want to go and see to get the body and blood of our Savior. But he's not the centerpiece, because all of our focus is on God. In the workplace, all of our focus is on doing our jobs, but ultimately it's like moving this product out of the factory and making money, I guess. That common orientation. Now, I would say that despite the need for these men to maintain some distance, no man can be ultimately alone. And all leaders have confidants. And the foremen swear and they do things which are inappropriate. And no priest is going to be completely isolated and perfect. They'll have their errors and their moments, and they will have people that they must confide in. But this is best done more under wraps than openly. That's what I would say about that. I mentioned, they always have physical markers of their status. Like the priest wears clothing which is different from the other clergy or from common people in the congregation. The priest wears a cassock. The last thing I would say is that one of the foremen at the factory, his hand is physically misshapen. I believe for many years laboring, I guess, cutting meat. Or either he had an accident or something happened to his thumb is completely dislocated. It looks very odd, like he wouldn't be able to grab things properly, but he had that deformity from some stress or series of accidents, or probably just repeated strain on you pulling meat with a hook or using cutting or whatever. So he had that physical marker of his years in the trenches. The other foreman, like he's not quite as old, but he's obviously put in his years. He has a bit of a stare, like staring off into the distance. Sometimes he'll just swear, but that's not too often. But you know that like he's understanding things about the production process that I don't know what's going on. So he's got to get through a lot of stuff that day, and if anything goes wrong, the management is going to be blaming him. It's not really for everyone or for most people to be in this position, to be a foreman at a factory, to be a priest. I mean, these are really not the easiest things to do. It really takes a lot out of you, and ultimately you have to give credit to these men, and it is ultimately going to be men and should be men that are capable of doing this, but not all men can do that. I don't know if I could do that. You have to respect these men, and because they've given up their whole lives to this cause. Hasta luego, amigos.